Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Just do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Hey listeners, just a quick message before the episode begins. If you volunteer to participate in our coffee invention taste test and focus group project, please be sure to get your completed evaluation forms to the Iron Radio intern, Kayla, as soon as possible. I've asked Kayla to pass along the list of anyone who takes a picture of their evaluation sheet and sends it to her so I can offer a little reward and thank you for your effort. We've been fortunate that this invention has actually won a few awards, but we need your feedback in order to move forward with the patent and a preliminary release of the product through gyms and coffee shops. Thanks. Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiology and sports nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
And this is Phil Stevens. I'm a strength coach. I run Strength Guild, a powerlifter, powerlifting coach. I'm on the way to a meet right now.
Sweet.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet Cert and a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, presenting at Paleo Effects. Presented yesterday, a couple podcasts and 2 panels today, and one more day tomorrow.
Busy man.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we have Arthur Lynch with us. Arthur, can you distill yourself in a sentence or two?
Sure, yeah. So, thanks for having me on, guys. My name is Arthur Lynch. I'm Irish. I'm based in Limerick in Ireland. I'm a current competitive powerlifter in the Irish branch of the IPF. I'm actually vice president of the federation here. I'm a former competitive bodybuilder myself, and I am a graduate student as well. So I'm studying for my PhD here in the University of Limerick.
Excellent. All right, everyone. So we're going to get to the usual mail and news first. Really news, actually, today. I have 2 little tidbits, and I don't want to waste too much time because I want to get to Arthur's origin story. Because he seems to really fit the Iron Radio mold in so many ways, but...
Strength and muscle sport news.
This is something that was news to me, and I just read this a couple of days ago. The FDA to modernize dietary supplement regulations. And actually, Arthur, it'd be interesting to hear some of the differences out of Ireland with this, right? My perception is that the U.S. is almost the Wild West in our liberal approach to allowing so many different kinds of dietary supplements, but that might change for the better or worse, depending on your opinion. So it says here, for the first time in 25 years, according to FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, there's going to be some modifications in the way they enforce DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, which was created all the way back in '94. It says, to continue to fulfill our public health obligations, we need to modernize and strengthen our overall approach to these products. Above all else, the FDA's duty is to protect consumers from harmful products. So if you like the liberal availability of supplements in this country, this might be a concern to you. It says... One of the things they like to do is to ensure that dietary supplements contain the ingredients that they're labeled to contain. So again, the first priority is protecting consumers from harm. Second is to ensure label compliance with what they claim to contain and nothing else. And it says a third priority is informed decision-making, whereby they want consumers and healthcare professionals to be able to make informed decisions on recommending, purchasing, and using dietary supplements. So one of the ways they want to do this, as far as an operations change, would be leveraging existing authorities to evaluate new products and ingredients as they are introduced, and to develop new enforcement strategies. So I think you could tell by some of this language that this looks like a hammer is coming down potentially.
Yeah.
In the coming months, the FDA plans to provide additional details. So there it is. This is, by the way, from Food Technology Magazine, IFT.org. Wow, right? Because we've already had discussions on the show before about how it's not the complete Wild West that it used to be, like was portrayed in movies like Bigger, Stronger, Faster. You know, people are just capsulating stuff in their kitchen and laughing about how crude it is.
Yeah.
Or it's really not like that even now. But this makes it look like, I don't know. I suppose an uncharitable observer might say this is a power or money grab, right? Because if you have to go through some very expensive paperwork process submitting any new, innovation when it comes to dietary supplements, the FDA then has the power, more power than maybe now, to decide what comes to market and what doesn't. Or, from a financial side, they're going to make tens of thousands of dollars as you have to keep introducing, applications for new ingredients or formulations. Now, that's speculation on my behalf, right? So, I don't know.
Yeah. It does make you wonder, though. I know they've been kind of pushing for more and more regulations, especially for new ingredients, and even in the past several years. It's been also very vague as to what exactly that means and what they're going to do also.
Yeah. There's been quite a few differences sort of coming down the pike here from this Scott Gottlieb, the commissioner. So, Arthur, what about you? I mean, what is the status with dietary supplements in Ireland? Can you get most of what you want? Do you feel like there's a lot of restrictions?
I'd say, well, like most things, Ireland is a little bit behind the US. So, I mean, if these regulations or this move towards tightening up the level of control around them is occurring now in the US, it's probably going to be a little bit further down the line before we see that here. I'd say probably, yeah, we can kind of get, whatever you want on the market. I'm not that well versed in it myself, but from my own perspective, one thing that is an area of concern for me and with people I work with is, so I would have a lot of clients and obviously myself competing in drug-tested powerlifting. So it's very important that that they're not taking something that they could possibly fail a test for. And I'm a little bit skeptical sometimes of people who say, "Oh, I failed because of X dietary supplement." It's like, well, is that a cover-up, or is that is that something you were using to mask the stuff that you were actually taking? But there is actually some research to suggest that a lot of supplements don't necessarily only contain what they have listed in their ingredients. Right. And that's an area of concern, Right. I think in terms of what we're doing here, there was a documentary that was released a couple of months ago, a fairly damning documentary on it was called Steroid Ireland, and you can probably imagine what the content of that was like. A very biased and a very damning assessment of anabolic steroid usage in Ireland. But one of the things it did highlight was that there was a particular supplement company based within Ireland that were, for people in the know, it was no big revelation for us, but they were well known for kind of, in inverted commas, hiding the good stuff behind the counter,
Yeah.
This documentary did a lot to bring that into the public eye. So I suppose with that there might be almost with that level of fear mongering that comes with that, there might be a push towards regulating that whole industry a lot more here. I'm not really sure, but that would be my guess anyway.
Right. My perception has always been that the EU is just much less tolerant, of a lot of the dietary supplement kinds of things. The irony to me is it seems like anabolic steroids seem less regulated. I'm painting with a really broad brush, right, across the entire, continent of Europe here. Whereas supplements seem to get more restriction and focus and attention. Even the Canadians have had stricter laws than we have down here in the U.S. when it comes to dietary supplements. So, but again, but that's that's just my bias. And to your point about how much of this is the good stuff behind the counter secretly versus openly sold, and things like that. Here, of course, we have if listeners aren't familiar, we have collegiate series from a couple of different dietary supplement companies, the bigger ones, and that's partly the point, is that they don't contain anything that's going to make you test positive. If you buy a protein powder or a weight gainer, it's not going to have a little extra clenbuterol or something in there. Because, of course, a lot of collegiate teams are very paranoid about that kind of stuff. They have to meet certain protein limits and all kinds of things, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely an issue, but there's that fine line, isn't it? It's like so many other things between regulation and actually protecting the public from harm, because that's always going to be the argument, right? From professional groups, whether it's exercise phys or nutrition or even the government here, is we want to protect the public. But what's the other potential ramifications of this? I don't want to say agenda, but what are the other ramifications? And one would be less innovation, slower release to the market, more power in the hands of the FDA, and so it's just a two-sided coin, really. But
and maybe even just on that as well, another potential ramification that I'm just thinking off the top of my head is if particular companies have to meet a certain standard, or their supplements have to be of a certain quality or a certain standard, that they have to pay a certain fee to some governing body, and that squeezes out a lot of companies that are, maybe doing everything else right, but just they can't, they get squeezed out financially.
Yes, no, exactly. The big companies are going to be favored with a lot of these regulations, right? Let's say, for example, it costs $10,000 to submit a new ingredient or a new product formulation, or let's say it's $100,000 US dollars. Then the big companies can do that. The smaller companies cannot. And so, does that favor monopolies and stuff like that? Yeah, there's a lot of things that could come out of this. Phil, I know you're driving there, but do you have a natural lifters that are concerned with dietary supplements and that kind of stuff, or is it just not an issue with the way you guys roll?
We want the good stuff behind the counter. No. In general, some of my high school and collegiate people, yeah, of course. So, and anybody in USAW. I mean, USAW has come down hard now. So, I mean, they can test you anytime, anywhere. So, once you are, you don't even have to be high level. Just once you register with that USAW card, you are able to be tested. Not saying they're going to do it, but
wow.
So yeah, we definitely have to keep an eye on it for sure.
Yeah. Do you think your people will be ticked off if there's more regulations, or you think it's like, listen, we're going to get our creatine and protein regardless, or fish oils, and that's all we care about?
I can't see them. A lot of the stuff we use is just pretty basic, and like you said, creatine and protein, and I don't see much coming of that,
Yeah.
My guess is this is geared at things like kratom and things like that have become quite popular as of late.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Mike, you and I both, we have worked with dietary supplement companies and just rolled our eyes, right? Like so much of the dose, not just the ingredient, but the doses of them in a bottle is based so much on price point of what they can sell the bottle for. It's not always the most efficacious dosage, of different things. And yeah, so I mean, you can't have complete lack of regulation, but then too much regulation, like I said, could pinch out the little guy or limit innovation. It'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, I would just love to see, instead of trying to pass more regulation and make it more confusing, just be like, hey, you have to disclose everything that's on the label. No, you shouldn't be able to copy someone else's formula per se, which I know that gets messy and into patents and, what is open, what is not. And then at very minimum, how about actual enforcement of what you say is on the label is actually in the freaking bottle?
Yeah.
Because I think that's what a lot of the questions come down to. And if you have consumers that don't trust even the label claims, it's like, oh, you're kind of screwed for starters. And we have enough legislation and regulation on that already. We just don't, the FDA doesn't have the manpower or desire right now to enforce any of that, really.
Yeah, that's definitely my bias as well. I would like to see resources if they're going to pump money into this. It's not more aggressive ways to bust little companies, but rather quick information turnaround so they can meet this. What is it? This second one, I think it was, which was so health authorities and even consumers, they can make more educated decisions, sort of thing. But okay. I have one last little thing here, just I want to fire off quickly. It's fairly brief, and then we'll get to Arthur's origin story. This is from, I got it through labroots.com, but they often get it from even other sources. It's entitled, Have You Taken Your Daily Nature Pill? And this is interesting, too, because I heard somebody say this from, it was actually an Amazon executive mention that this was something that they build into some of their their national headquarters and stuff. They keep this in mind. Here's a study to support what this guy was going on about. It's basically about getting out in nature and what is it going to do for your stress and recovery and things like that. But it says the positive impacts of spending time in nature are well established, but just how much time and which type of exposure do you need, right, to get certain stress reduction benefits? In a statement to Science Daily, Dr. Mary Carol Hunter, who was a lead author, she's an associate prof at University of Michigan. She summarized that, quote, the study shows that for the greatest payoff in terms of efficiently lowering levels of the stress hormone cortisol, you should spend 20 to 30 minutes sitting or walking in a place that provides you with a sense of nature. They did an 8-week study. They analyzed salivary cortisol and salivary amylase, which is a carbohydrate, first step of sort of carbohydrate digestion, if you will. But it fluctuates with stress. So anyway, it says elevated cortisol levels, of course, have myriad effects, including interference with learning and memory, lower immune function, increased blood pressure, and increased weight, and heart disease. It says salivary amylase is produced by the digestive system and responds to physical and physiological stress. So throughout the study, they took saliva samples before and after 4 different nature experiences. I think importantly, the subjects, the participants, they got to choose certain aspects of these experiences. And I think that would make sense, too, because what we might, like Mike, like you may dig sitting at the beach and meditating, and somebody else may like a walk through a canopied forest, sort of, right? So basically, they did 20 to 30-minute nature experiences, and indeed, cortisol levels were reduced by 21% per hour, and alpha amylase dropped by 28.1% per hour. It says these biomarkers continue to decline, although slower, even after the nature experience was done. So it's interesting that they did, and then they talk, of course, about should healthcare providers literally try to prescribe this for stress reduction. This is something that I actually do. When I'm under a lot of stress, I turn to music and nature. Those are the two things that have worked pretty well for me. I just think there's something built into human beings' DNA with this kind of stuff. But yeah, so 20 to 30 minutes, that just feels doable. It's not like you have to go on some kind of 5-day nature retreat to get your cortisol levels down. Might be helpful for our population, right, as far as overtraining or people who are under a lot of risk, guys like Arthur who are, school plus training and all these other stressors. So just thought that was neat.
I just find that getting outside, getting in nature, even if you want to meditate outside, walk. I like doing just an AM, walk if you can get to a little bit more wooded area. Or the other game I play with clients is there's a thing called tree blindness, where after a while people spend so much time inside. They see trees, but they don't consciously differentiate between them, which sounds really bizarre. And I'm like, just walk around, try to look up, see how many trees you can find, and just see if they're different. Like, you don't have to go to your Wikipedia and try to identify them. But it's just crazy just to get them up and looking around, not to stare at their phone or look at their feet the whole time when they're walking around.
Right on. It was actually disturbing. When I went out to San Diego for my master's program, I was so stunned and aware of these gorgeous palm trees, like right outside my apartment door, and I'd put my hand on the trunk and look up and really soak them up. And then I thought to myself, don't let them become background. But I'm telling you, after about 6 to 8 months, they became background, and I was I was aware of it, but I couldn't force my body not to desensitize to these gorgeous palm trees, and sort of take them for granted. It was hard. Like you said, you have to be conscious about the experience, kind of. So, Arthur, I mean, I've driven cross country in Southern Ireland, at least. I mean, that beautiful green rolling hills. It's like some kind of Tolkien novel or something to me. Yeah. I remember going on a bus tour between Dublin and the cliffs of Moher.
Very nice.
And it was just a pretty drive. And I just wondering, do you get many? Is there a lot of chances to get out in nature for you? Is it too urbanized or suburbanized where you are? That kind of stuff.
No, not really. I mean, Ireland is small. I mean, where I am, I'm 2 hours away from Dublin, and I'm probably 45 minutes away from the cliffs of Moher.
Yeah.
So, and there's obviously a lot of other cool spots in between. I mean, Ireland is a fairly sparsely populated country with a huge like agriculture is massive here. So I mean, there's lots of greenery and lots of really cool, I suppose, natural landscape here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, kind of to your point there, but when you were on your master's program, you are inclined to sort of take it for granted a little bit when it's there and it's around you the entire time. I really don't get enough of it.
Do you purposely try to get out in it to help you recover?
Yeah, honestly, not as much as I should. Yeah. And that's a combination of laziness and just maybe not making it a priority for myself, because it's like one of those things. I suppose if I could give you an analogy with sleep, right? So like we all know that like sleep is super important, but we're always keen to be doing things, and we'll be more inclined to like sacrifice sleep, even though it's like integral for restoration and recuperation and making sure that you're as productive and efficient as possible, in the forthcoming days. So it's kind of like that, where you'll be like, I don't probably need that. I can skimp on that getting out more because I've got stuff to do. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, in a sense, better. That doesn't mean you're gonna go do it.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of idea.
Well, right, Phil. You guys. There's a lot of nice, sort of Midwestern countryside and stuff for you guys. Do you try to train outside when you can, or are you always in your facility, or how do you?
Yeah, like this time of year, it's warmed up, so we got the doors all the way open. We get outside in the street as much as we can, and then, like every weekend, I purposely get outside and work on our farm, and things like that. If it's cutting wood, it's whatever. Just get outside and get some sunlight and get in the nature. And the benefit of that too is my son loves it, so he gets to go run around and be crazy.
Excellent. So, yeah, I just like everybody. This study just sort of it quantifies, right? It gives you something to point to about here's a fairly concrete benefit to, because some of the best workouts I've ever had were like on the rooftops or some of the gyms in San Diego, or the Venice Beach type environments. You're lifting in the sun and the breeze and everything. It can be pretty freaking cool. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm lucky because where we live at home, and I'm actually at home, is I can open the garage doors, and we live at the end of just dead end. So it's just the neighbors around there who we've known for years, and they're super cool. So I'll turn the stereo up or put the rower out in the middle of the road or carry stuff up and down the street and do all the weird stuff they no longer think is weird, but...
Right, yeah, right. Okay. All right, well, thank you for your patience, Arthur. Let's turn the attention to you before we go to break. Let's talk about, you're combining academics and powerlifting, and how did it all start for you?
Yeah. Do you want the longer version or the shorter version?
Well, we've got a good 10, 15 minutes to talk about it, so.
Okay. Right, well, I suppose I started lifting weights basically kind of by accident. It was sort of through playing rugby back when I was in high school, or what you guys would refer to as high school, or what we would what we would call a secondary school over here. And so we came to the end of the season, and it was at that point we were going to be enrolled in a strength and conditioning program over the course of the summer, so that we all just didn't, buzz off and do nothing for the summer. And just from that summer on, I was just completely hooked on lifting weights, and just the whole idea of, you have this input, the lifting weights, and the output being, increases in how much you lifted or how your body looked. I was just fascinated by it. So it was at that point I decided I wanted to study it. So I enrolled in sport and exercise sciences here in the University of Limerick, and got my degree in that. And as I was going along doing that, I packed in rugby, and I'd taken up just being a guy who just lifted weights for a few years. And then I decided, I wouldn't actually mind trying my hand at bodybuilding, because as a teenager I was a little bit on the chubby side. I used to joke that these origin stories were always either the chubby guy who got lean or the really skinny guy who put on some muscle. I was definitely the former. So I was like, that would be really cool for someone who was chubby as a kid and kind of got teased a little bit about his size and stuff, to sort of just do that. So I did that for a couple of years. Kind of burned myself out a little bit, as is so often the case with the extremist lifestyle that is bodybuilding. So I went away from that then, and then again just went back to just being a guy who just lifted weights. And then I decided, screw it, I'm going to try do a bit of powerlifting. And and then didn't look back from there on. And so I've been powerlifting 5-6 years now. I've got into coaching out of the gym I work in here in Limerick, City Gym Limerick. I offer online coaching services through Sigma Nutrition. I know Mike is familiar with that company. He's been on the podcast with Danny before.
Well, Danny, I said hi. He's the man.
Yeah. And then on the academic side, so when I finished my degree, I really didn't feel, because sport and exercise science is a very generalist degree, so you get introduced to a lot of different areas, but you're obviously not specialist in them at all. And even at that stage, I had the foresight to know that I wasn't really up to scratch in terms of my abilities as a thinker, and that like my knowledge base wasn't where I wanted it to be. So I made it my business to enroll in a PhD program. I applied for it the year I was graduating from my undergraduate degree, and I missed out on it. So I went away and worked for a year, and then I applied for it again and got it the second time. And so here I am now. So that's basically it, yeah.
So what's the academic specialty as far as like what are the profs researching, or what's your real focus as far as the specialty goes?
Right. So it has changed, and you're probably going to laugh when you hear about how different it is now to when I started out. So initially we were supposed to look at an augmentation of the adaptations to resistance exercise using a protein and a fish oil based supplement. And about a year into the PhD, so as in myself and my supervisors, we kind of we mutually came to the conclusion that there wasn't really anything there, because the evidence base for it was very thin, and then there was some research that was actually published subsequent to my enrolling in the program that flat out refuted it. So we're like, right, it's not ethical for us to continue this route. So then I was looking down the route of HMB, and HMB is a tricky one because it has a very tainted reputation, and rightly so, because of some well, I'm just going to say it's some fabricated work in that area. So there was always that kind of hesitation on that part, but some of the research that was there, depending on what population you were looking at, was was kind of promising, but I just wasn't confident enough in it. But at the same time, I was happy enough to pursue that if it meant that I could replicate a similar design to the infamous Wilson papers, the infamous Jacob Wilson papers, and find nothing, because I think that would be a useful finding. But just between sort of some logistical constraints, and my supervisors weren't overly keen on my rationale for the design, we eventually scrapped it. Then simultaneously along with that, I had been sort of flirting with some muscle testing sort of research. So I would use like isokinetic dynamometry, isometric dynamometry, and then I was looking at using an isometric squat test. And I had completed a study a few years back on the reliability of an isometric squat test. So when the HMB thing sort of fell apart, I just decided I was going to go full on into that. So right now what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the sensitivity of the measure. So like thinking more along the practical application of it. If you have this test that can tell you, your force output in a particular position in the squat, that's great. But if you do a training program and you come back and because of the error of the measurement or whatever it might be, that you just don't see any change in it, well then there's probably no real grounds for using it, on a purely on a pragmatic basis. So this current study that I'm looking at right now, we're testing subjects pre-training on the isometric along with a 1 rep max squat, giving them a 6-week training program, and then we're going to retest them at the end of it. They're not naive subjects, but they'd be sort of in the recreationally trained category. So we're confident that there's good scope that we would see improvements in the 1RM, so in the 1 rep max. So given that, we want to know is what's the change in the isometric peak force, and if we find that it's not sensitive, well then we probably wouldn't pursue this measure, and we would probably recommend that people just keep using 1 rep max. We're not looking at it from the point of view of replacing a 1 rep max. Obviously that would be silly, but there's certain things that you can get from the isometric test that you can't get from a 1 rep max, and it's sort of less sensitive to the skill demand of the 1 rep max as well. So it might be a nice complementary measure, if that makes sense. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, very cool.
I like to ask that question of guys like yourself, partly because it sounds to me like you're exploring everything from more measurement to nutrition, kind of a broad base, and again, so much of it depends on your advisor and whatnot. But I like to ask that question because I like to get a feel. Are you an oddball? Is your interest in strength and muscle mass unusual? Are you surrounded by essentially a bunch of people studying mitochondrial biogenesis and endurance training and and all that kind of thing?
Lonnie, I'm an oddball in every room I walk into.
Nothing wrong with that.
But particularly, even so, when I'm in the gym, I'm an oddball because I'm a guy who's involved in academics, and when I'm in the academic setting, I'm an oddball because I'm a guy who lifts weights for the sake of lifting weights.
Right, right. I totally get it.
Yeah.
Okay. We are going to go to break, everyone, and then we're going to explore something that we haven't yet touched on with Arthur, which is he's a podcaster, so like we are, and we're just going to sort of touch base about some of the good, bad, and ugly in strength and fitness podcasting, maybe how it differs in Ireland versus the U.S., or is it so global it doesn't matter, that sort of thing. So we'll be back in just a moment. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book. But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Okay, everyone, we're back. It's Mike and Lonnie, and it's Arthur Lynch, and we are going to talk about strength and fitness podcasting. The good, the bad, the ugly, maybe regional differences in powerlifting or bodybuilding, that sort of thing. So my first question for you, Arthur, is let's just explore that good, bad, ugly concept. In your estimation, since you've been podcasting, and maybe you could even fill us in on how long you've been doing this and why. But what's good about podcasting? What drew you to it, and what kind of benefit does it provide to our community?
Yeah. Well, I'll just answer that first question initially. So compared to you guys, I'm still a relative newbie. So I've been podcasting for about 2 years now. Mm-hmm. And how it all started for me was actually by accident. So it was, what was it, 2017? Yeah, so we were coming up to our Irish powerlifting national championships, and myself and a buddy of mine, we were really excited about the event, so we wanted to promote it a little bit more. So I was talking to Danny Lennon from Sigma Nutrition at the time, and he actually had a sort of a side project which was a powerlifting based podcast, and I said to him, if we did this preview of our national championships, would you be happy to host it on the Sigma powerlifting podcast? And he kind of said that he thought it would be probably more appropriate if we did it as our own sort of once-off thing. And that's sort of what we intended to do with it. And that's exactly what we did. But the thing was, that it got an extraordinary amount of positive feedback, to the point that myself and my co-host, we decided to keep it going. And we just said, we'll just see if we can have a bit of fun with it. There was no we had no real objective as such. It was just, let's just talk about things related to powerlifting, maybe get some guests on who can give us some more information on various different topics, and just run with it, really. And here we are 2 years later, we're still at it. We have about 60 episodes now, so reasonably consistent with the uploads. And we cover a lot of different areas, so I mean, the ins and outs of powerlifting, if you like, nutrition, psychology, and if there are areas where they're not my area of expertise, I'll have an expert on to talk about them. I mean, that's a big thing for me, is like staying within my scope. So if I want to have a discussion around a particular topic, I'm going to get an expert in the field on it, and that's all it's really been for me. And I suppose in more recent times, how I've kind of looked at it is I sort of have almost a selfish outlook of like, okay, well, if no one else is going to listen to this, I'd like to get some worthwhile learning outcomes from it. So if I get someone on, I want to learn from them. And if someone else listens to it, great. And as it transpired, people do listen to it, and I get a lot of very positive feedback on it. So that's fantastic. The other thing as well is that as I've got busier with my PhD, I've been less able to do things like in-person coaching and like writing and stuff like that. So as you probably touched on when I had you on my podcast, Lonnie, is that you can use the podcast to reach a certain demographic of people in a very efficient manner. You're just talking for an hour, besides the editing process and that kind of thing as well. But for the most part, the time involved isn't anywhere near as much as you might spend coaching or writing, for example. And so you're able to influence more people in a more efficient way, because if you have however many 100 or 1,000 people listening to you, that's more efficient than if you were to like reach out to those people on a individual level, if that makes sense,
Sure. Yeah, the impact of it. Now, you said, well, I've actually heard, let me put it this way, and I mean this in the best possible way, that there are more sheep than people in Ireland. So if you have a less population density, is it important to have something like a podcast to connect the far-flung members? I mean, or is powerlifting pretty popular there, and they'd get a sense of community anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a bit of both, because powerlifting has really exploded over here, as it has, I think, worldwide in the last maybe 5-6 years. It's gotten really big here lately. So the community is that bit bigger, but it also helps to connect people. I mean, and people get to know us, and then they might see us at competitions and come over to us and say, oh, look, I really enjoy what the podcast you're doing. I find them really informative. Mm-hmm. I found, this particular episode really helpful for me personally. And, that in and of itself is enough for me to keep doing them, because I know that I'm actually making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
Mike, you travel a lot. What's your perception of physical communities versus secondary communities like a podcast? I mean, plus, of course, you're an engineer and all that. I mean, as far as understanding technology, how important, what kind of shift and how important is it, do you think, that we have basically podcast and YouTube and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a good, easy way for people to get information and to also realize, like you guys were saying, that there's other people who are maybe similar to them, maybe not the same, but I even think of like an extreme case of marketing and what people will sell and what people will buy, right? Because if you buy something that says that there is a confirmed interest in it, and I remember going to a marketing thing once and the guy was selling, I don't know how many millions of dollars he made per year doing a sock of the month club. I'm like, a sock? Who the heck is into socks so much that they would buy different socks just each month? But I guess a lot of people.
Apparently, huh?
So if you expand that into even just powerlifting or strongman or grip sport or whatever, that with the internet you can now find a group of people who you thought you're the only person in your state that does this, and you find, oh, there's hundreds to thousands of people across the world that do it. So there is a bigger community there than what you probably feel like. And I think both of them are important. Getting information that you can listen to while you're driving in your car or doing your dishes or things like that is good. My only fear is that people can rely on that a little bit too much and miss out on the actual physical culture experience of being with other people and lifting with other people and doing that sort of thing. Because I think even if podcasts and the only social media is the only outlet you have for that, I think it's good. But I think having some type of personal contact or people that you know personally is kind of like the next level. And I know, like, even going to Costa Rica and being down there for like 2 weeks, a lot of the people who come down there, haven't really spent time with a lot of other, fitness professionals or people with, same interests for a long period of time. We're doing meditation in the morning, we're learning about stuff, we're eating together, we're lifting together. And that's like a huge experience for a lot of people. And even myself every year is a reminder of, oh yeah, this is kind of what it feels like, and just to be around other people at the same time.
Right. No, that makes sense. There's definitely pros and cons to the whole, I mean, if you include podcasts as part of social media, but the whole social media aspect of it's like mortar for the community, but I'm not sure it's the bricks, And to your point, I mean, there's a real financial cost to drive or fly somewhere and have a physical one-on-one experience. I like how podcasts, they can kind of draw out, kind of like to the conversation with you, Arthur, about if you're an oddball, if you're this egghead/meathead, you probably are in a bit of a minority, and it's a way for you to find like-minded people and realize that there's nothing wrong with your uncommon nature, and that sort of thing. So it can be reinforcing, I guess. Okay, but the next question I have for you, Arthur, is what about the bad? Is there anything bad in fitness podcasting, or have you heard bad, like strength or power or bodybuilding podcasts, or what's your thought about the dark side here?
Yeah, so I'm probably not in the best position to answer this, because I tend to sort of shield myself away from anything I think might be not good information, just because I just don't want to put that stress upon myself of like knowing that is out there. It's almost like bury my head in the sand and just pretend it doesn't exist a lot of the time. But the reality is that it very much does. So there's some like all walks of life, there's good and bad. So there's some fantastic podcasts to put out great information that's science backed and it's evidence based and it's rationally thought out, and the claims they're making are much more reasoned, and not sensationalist. And there's the complete opposite then as well. So there's podcasts with bad ideas that are, maybe pushing just flat out incorrect information, stuff that might potentially be actively harmful. They're pushing shady products, it's a problem. And like, we're in our own sort of preaching to the choir here, talking about this ourselves, but it's for the person who doesn't have that critical thinking framework or doesn't have the necessary skill set to be able to say, I'm able to detect that that's a nonsense claim, or that's not correct. They're the people I would sort of worry about more. And actually something I was just thinking about there, when you're talking about the in-person experience, from your guys' perspective, do you find that the fact that there are so many podcasts now and that people have made so many appearances on different podcasts that actually hurts things like seminar sales and stuff, because people have heard the person so much already and they're like, oh, well, I've already got all this free content from them offline. What else would I learn paying $100 or $150 to go and hear them talk about the same thing?
That's an interesting question, Arthur. Joey Antonio, Dr. Jose Antonio, when we started IronRadio, he made a comment about, well, if you're going to do something like that, it's got to be free. I mean, people won't pay for, they're spoiled or entitled or whatever, and they won't pay. And that has crossed my mind before, and I'm sure it has Mike too. And Mike does a lot of traveling to seminars and stuff. I mean, and we give away a lot of stuff for free. What we don't do is give individual assessments and training programs and advice, and we get asked that regularly. So that's where we draw the line, I think. But yeah, what do you think, Mike?
I mean, I've had to go through that again and just determine what boundaries I'm going to do, because I put up a thing on Facebook a while ago that I basically just canned like 1,400 emails I've been trying to get to and back and forth for several months, and I'm just like, nope, I'm not getting back to them. And then I said, okay, here's the deal. Here's my office hours, so I have 2 hours a week I donate. People can literally call, and I'll talk to them and answer any questions they want. But they have to call. They have to call during a specific time. They can't leave a voicemail, and I'm not going to get back to them per se. They can send an email, and I'll get back to their email during those times only. And again, these are all for paying clients, things of that nature.
Okay.
If they want free info, right, they can listen to this podcast. They can listen to a bunch of other podcasts I've done. I put out a newsletter almost every day, so 5 to 6 days a week. That's free. I've got tons of articles, guest articles, other places. They can get that for free. So, but after that, if you want to pick my brain for an hour, then it's going to cost you money.
Yeah.
So just trying to be very clear of what is kind of those lines, and it's crazy because you'll still get some people who still complain. Well, you should do this or that. It's like, well, no other industry puts out in general as an industry this amount of free information. I would never think of calling my attorney and be like, hey, I got a couple of questions. It's just a half hour. Like, all right, make an appointment, and they're, of course, going to charge me.
No doubt. No doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phil says that often. In fact, I spoke to an attorney, and I quite like her. She's helping with the patent stuff that we're doing with the coffee invention, and she's like, yeah, any questions, let me know. And then later I see in other communications that, she's getting like up to $1,500 per question from the university, and I'm like, whoa. Now, don't get me wrong. You're talking about somebody who's a lawyer and an engineer. I mean, if somebody deserves it, it's her. But and it's not unreasonable to charge, like you say, a professional person. But yeah, Phil will always say that too. Like, put me on a program. Tell me what to eat. Yeah. Wow. I guess the answer to that is just no, bud. It's got to be no. Otherwise, we devaluate ourselves.
Yeah, and we all know that those are not easy questions to answer. Someone sends an email and they're like, well, how many mackerels should I eat? It's like, I don't know. I mean, the amount of time for me to sit down if you were a private client and figure that out is not an easy answer, much less no background, no other info to go on. And then even when I followed up with some people with free advice, the odds of them actually doing it, so am I actually making a difference in people's lives?
Yeah.
Yeah, most people didn't follow up with it. And I don't think it's a conscious thing per se. It's a unconscious value associated with the information, so and even in like newsletters, I tend to only do more soft teaching and not a lot of hard teaching. So it's like, hey, yeah, intervals are great for this or that. Here's the mechanism, here's the actual study, but I'm not going to write out an exact program of how they would implement it, because there's just too many variables, and then all you get is an inbox full of like 1,800 questions of, well, I can't do my sprints on Tuesday morning, so what should I do instead? And it's just never ending.
Yeah. It's sort of to Arthur's point about, can people smell a bozo? Can they ask the right questions? I mean, all we're doing really is saying, here's some resources, or here's some conversation and facts and whatnot. And you're going to have to put together something yourself, hopefully in a more educated way. Maybe it's finding the right book, or, reading some intro level academic textbook or whatever it is, so you can start to ask the right questions. You can smell the bozos. You can set up your own programs, or maybe reach out to a coach. I mean, because we all know that even if you know your stuff, working with a coach can still be valuable. Like, it might shock people that any one of us might still work with a training or diet coach or something like that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you just need that the behavioral, accountability or reminder, or sounding board. There's still benefits to it, but we're almost out of time, and I just wanted to follow up on the ugly, as far as we talked about good, bad, and ugly, but this is a hard question, but Arthur, you're a straight shooter. What kind of qualifications would you expect if someone's going to assume the mantle of having a podcast to inform a community or help glue it together? What do you expect out of that person?
Are we talking about a fitness or nutrition related podcast specifically?
Yes. Well, particularly, I mean, most of our people are barbell and strength related, but yeah, just fitness, nutrition, I think, period. I mean, we both know there's a lot of, in a Web 2.0 environment, there's no editors as gatekeepers. Everybody seems to put stuff online, but what would your advice, I guess, for our listeners as to what to expect?
Yeah. If this question was directed towards, if this answer was directed towards people who were maybe considering setting up their own fitness or nutrition related podcast, I would say at a very minimum that you need to have some sort of formal education, preferably a degree. And the reason being is that until you've been around long enough, you don't realize how much you don't know. Mm-hmm. You're actually unaware of how much you don't know, Mm-hmm. And that's thankfully something I'm relieved that I didn't get into this when I was younger, more naive and probably thought I was, the biz like. But I don't think that, like, say if you have two podcast hosts, I don't think they both have to have a degree, because I think it's useful to have the very educated person, and then maybe someone who's almost like a link to the more general population or the non-academic, because then that combination can sort of improve the communication to the listenership, if that kind of makes sense. Because if sometimes very good academics can be brutal communicators, and sometimes having someone along with them to just say, I don't really understand that fully, could you maybe explain that a different way? Or they might ask a question that in and of itself is insightful, and then you think, actually you don't know about this thing that I take, that this piece of knowledge that I take for granted. Mm-hmm. So let me break that down for you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. In fact, it almost, an analogy might be like in comedy, it helps to have a straight man to make the funny guy sound really funny, And in this case, it's helpful to have that sort of straight man, that everyman who's like, can you tell me what that even means, bro? In a kind of just a conversational environment. What do you think, Mike? I know that's a hard question, but qualifications for someone who's going to do something like a nutrition or strength podcast?
I don't know.
I know it's hard.
You could argue either way. And
yeah.
I always just like that people are just very clear of what their background is. I mean, I don't have any problem if someone says, hey, I've been a strength coach for 15 years. I may not have a lot of formal education, but in my experience, here's what I've seen. Or same thing with, nutrition or whatever. Or if you're more on the academic side, hey, this is what the research says on this. What I don't like is people who have a lot of experience and then kind of try to do research, but kind of mess it up, and even vice versa. There's some stuff I'm like, ask me about Olympic weightlifting, I have no freaking idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I know basics, but I don't coach Olympic weightlifting. I don't even really coach a lot of people with form stuff per se in person. I do some, but you definitely don't want me as your day-to-day coach in the gym. It's it's going to be way too technical, probably pretty boring, and not really super motivating.
Yep. It's a good question to ask, is the person willing to say, I don't know about that one. Or, I would always say, even in the classroom when I taught strength and conditioning at the university, I'd say, listen, I'll talk about histology or muscle architecture or neuromuscular adaptations, but I'm not going to be the person you're going to be asking about your hip hinge and and in what order or sequence you should be trying to fire things in these cues. I'm not a coach, right? I'm a nutritionist, guys. I don't know or an exercise physiologist. And yeah, you have to be, if someone's willing to say, I don't know about that, that's actually gives credibility in my mind, because I think that a person who's lower on the spectrum, maybe, of either experiential or academic education, they're going to be much less likely to say, wow, I don't know that. Let me look that up for you, kind of thing.
I might add one little bit to what I was saying. So I think the answer I gave was maybe more for the, like, say someone who wanted to do like a nutrition podcast or a sports psychology podcast, something where like you can actually go to school for that.
Yeah.
I think if it was like specifically a powerlifting or specifically a bodybuilding podcast, obviously you wouldn't need that level of formal education, but you would need to, I would say, have a certain amount of experience built up. I don't know if that's like 5 years, 10 years, but you need to have a certain amount of skin in the game. And because otherwise you don't know what you might say. And I'm somewhat hesitant sometimes with like the guy who's just purely experienced, because I'm like, did you get to where you are because of what you do or in spite of what you do?
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I a little bit of both. Sometimes it's fun to talk about people. What's your competition cred, or so like to both your guys' points, when listeners get the spiel, they can get it from different angles, and the person's not trying to be all things to all people. We've had that discussion on the show before. Someone who's they seem to be an expert in nutrition and in powerlifting coaching, and look, they're a massotherapist and a kinesiologist,
and they're 19 years old.
right. Like Arthur said, no skin in the game. Like, you're 19, you've got maybe you're barely an adult. Right, so not enough skin in the game, bud.
And with the skin in the game, I look at, do people pay them for the service that they're doing? If they don't, I get kind of nervous. If you're doing hands-on work or whatever it is, in addition to nutrition or whatever else, do people pay you for that skill? If they don't, I get kind of nervous.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's that Web 2.0 environment where people are so eager, they're doing it for personal fame and not for maybe a higher purpose. Like, what we're trying to do is just have a bigger impact, give something back, and frankly, not have to have an enormous amount of preparation before we do it, so we can keep doing it regularly like we do, and that kind of stuff.
Don't tell them all of our secrets. We prep for hours upon hours.
Right. Right. On a Friday night, instead of going out, we all sit around together and practice a full show.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about partly like how Arthur, how you do it, like where you just kind of shoot the shit with a buddy, and we do a bit of that too. People will give us feedback regularly. I just heard again 2 days ago, can you just do more of the Shop Talk episodes? There's really something to be said. And I mean, I have to actually watch it. I don't launch into a lecture. I know I do that, right? And I'm partly sorry for that. But sometimes the shop talk is the most fun, and that's all somebody wants. They want light conversation on their commute to work, kind of thing. It could be a good thing. Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts, Arthur? Maybe whether about podcasting or more specifics about how they find yours. I really like the cross-pollinating with quality podcast here.
Absolutely. The only thing I might add, because it was something I looked up before coming on air, because I wasn't entirely sure what direction we were going with this, but just like the explosion of podcasting in general in the last couple of years has just been astounding. So I actually got some figures online, and as of 2019, there are 2 million podcasts indexed by Google.
Wow.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And in 2018, there was a podcast trends report. So they did a massive survey of like over 1,000 people. 76.8% of responders listen to podcasts for greater than 7 hours a week. 61.2% spend more time listening to podcasts than watching TV. And 48.8% of responders of this particular survey purchased an item having heard it advertised on a podcast. So I think that those are some interesting statistics, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the data I have are definitely older than that, but I've heard some things like podcast listeners are more loyal and trusting than someone who just watches YouTube, because, you know, you kind of flitter around on YouTube. You know, maybe there's a little bit less community for a lot of online stuff compared to podcasts, but I didn't realize it had exploded to such an extent. My goodness.
Yeah. Can I also say as well, just before you close out, Lonnie, how honored I am to be on this show, because this is actually the first podcast I ever listened to. I didn't even really know what a podcast was until I found you guys, and I just incredibly grateful to you guys for inviting me on. It's almost like a dream come true.
Well, thanks for that. We're just a bunch of goofballs, just like you and your buddies, you know. And we need to cross pollinate. I'm glad that you're coming on, because you're proof positive that, you know, there is that sort of egghead-meathead listenership. I think if anybody was just an academic or just a meathead, they'd get bored with us pretty fast. But people like you actually exist, so I'm pointing to you as proof. So
an end of one example.
Right, yeah. So just one more time, the name of your podcast, and can they get it through iTunes or?
Oh, no problem. Yes, so the name of my podcast, so we were initially called the No Lift Powerlifting Podcast, but we're a lot more broad in the topics that we cover now, so it's actually just called the No Lift Podcast, and you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Spotify.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
Nice.
Good stuff, yeah, for sure. Everybody, Phil, he's actually helping his team warm up and everything, so that's why he sort of dropped out like he sometimes does. We make this stuff happen. As you know, Mike's always so good about that too. So, and you know, and Arthur with the time differences and everything else. So I appreciate it, you guys. And we'll see everyone next week.
Awesome. See you guys.
Thanks again.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.